The neon sign flickers outside, casting jagged shadows across the wet asphalt. Inside, the music has quieted, the laughter and shouts of the crowd now a memory hanging in the air. You linger a moment by the bar, glass in hand, feeling the last pulse of the night in your chest. Most of the patrons have gone, only a few stragglers nurse their drinks, heads bowed, quiet. You decide to step to the restroom before leaving, navigating through the empty tables and sticky floors. The familiar scent of spilled beer and sawdust mingles with the faint trace of something metallic, like blood or maybe rust. As you push open the restroom door, it creaks loudly, echoing down the hallway. The silence outside feels deeper, as if the building itself is listening. You finish, turn toward the exit, and that's when you hear it. A faint scraping, coming from the basement stairs just around the corner. At first, you dismiss it. Maybe a loose board, or the cleaning crew still tidying up. But then it comes again, sharper this time, accompanied by a whisper so soft it could almost be mistaken for the wind. Don't leave, stay. Your heart races. You glance toward the basement door, the one you passed 100 times before without a second thought. Tonight, it feels alive. The shadows around it seem to shift, stretching toward you, pulsing in rhythm with your heartbeat. A cold draft snakes around your ankles, and you swear you see movement in the corner of your vision, a figure, pale and indistinct, vanishing when you look directly. The bartender calls out from the main floor, but her voice sounds distant, muffled, almost as if it's coming from underwater. You know the stories. They always say the basement is where the building keeps its secrets, where something lingers long after the music fades. And suddenly, the stories don't feel like tales anymore. You step back, unsure if you should flee or explore, when the echo of a woman singing, a soft, mournful tune, floats up from below. You freeze. The air grows colder. Your instincts scream at you to leave, but a part of you wants to know what waits down there in the shadows. The doorknob feels strangely warm under your grasp. Before the neon lights and country tunes, before the mechanical bull and the clinking of beer bottles, the Lander 44 licking pike in Wilder, Kentucky, had already borne witness to darkness. In the mid-1800s, a small slaughterhouse stood on the site. Its basement featured a well used to dispose of animal remains. Over the years, locals whispered that the well had become something more than a simple drain. It was called the portal to hell, the center of rumors about occult rituals performed on the property. After the slaughterhouse closed, the building sat empty for decades. Some claimed that during this time, a group of satanic worshippers occupied the space. They allegedly performed rituals involving the sacrifice of animals, and in some whispers, small children. These stories, whether true or exaggerated, set the stage for the experiences that would later terrify patrons of the nightclub. The most infamous tragedy tied to this land occurred long before Bobby Mackey ever arrived. In 1896, Pearl Bryan, a 22-year-old woman from nearby Greencastle, Indiana, was found murdered and decapitated. The brutal crime shocked the nation, and her killers were rumored to have been involved in dark, occult practices. The story clung to the land like a shadow, seeping into the building itself, weaving a chilling legacy that would not fade. Even after the years passed and the building changed hands, the echoes of blood, fear, and whispered rituals seemed to remain, waiting patiently for the day the music would start again. When Bobby Mackey opened his nightclub in 1978, he may have thought he was bringing life to the old building, but instead, he awakened something that had been waiting all along. In 1978, Bobby Mackey opened the doors to what would become one of the most notorious honky-tonks in America. The building, long steeped in a dark and tragic history, was transformed into a lively nightclub filled with the twang of steel guitars, the stomp of boots on the dance floor, and the laughter of patrons who had no idea of the shadows that lingered in the corners. The air inside smelled of sawdust and spilled beer, mixed with the faint, metallic tang of the basement below, a reminder of the building's grim past. The mechanical bull whirred to life, neon lights glowed in rhythmic patterns, and the bar became a local hub for country music lovers. Bobby Mackey himself performed on stage from time to time, a smiling host among the revelry. Yet almost immediately, strange things began to happen. Patrons would report hearing footsteps behind them when no one was there, or the faint strains of a woman singing softly in the dark, coming from the basement. Drinks would topple off the bar without cause, doors would slam on their own, and the jukebox, when powered off, sometimes played a single haunting song in the dead of night. Staff began to tell stories in hushed tones. A waitress swore she saw a pale figure watching from the corner of the room, vanishing the moment she blinked. A bartender claimed to have been grabbed by unseen hands while leaning over the rail, thrown across the floor, and heard a voice whisper, "Get out." And always, the basement seemed to call. The old well, long rumored to have been a site of dark rituals, radiated a cold, heavy presence. Even when the club was crowded and noisy, there were moments when the air felt unnaturally still, a pressure that made it impossible to ignore the feeling that something was watching from below. Despite these incidents, the nightclub thrived. The music drew people in, laughter drowned out unease, and life went on above the basement. But the whispers persisted, growing stronger over the years, carried in the boards of the floor, in the flicker of the neon, in the very walls themselves. The patrons may have come for the music, but the building had its own rhythm, a heartbeat older, darker, and waiting. Even on the busiest nights, the basement of Bobby Mackey's music world seemed to exist in its own world, a shadow beneath the neon, a place where the music above barely reached. The stairs leading down were steep and narrow, the air growing cooler with each step. The smell changed too, less sawdust and beer, more damp stone, metallic tangs, and something indefinably old, like the earth itself had been tainted. At the center of the basement stood the infamous well. Patrons and staff had long whispered about it. Some called it a portal to hell, though what lay beyond that darkness no one could say. In the early days of the nightclub, before the rumors became legend, a few brave, or foolish, souls ventured close, and many never forgot what they felt. A chill that sank into the bones, a pull in the stomach, a whisper in a language that sounded almost like their own but wasn't. Musicians reported strange occurrences as well. Instruments would go out of tune without explanation, sheet music would shift across stands, and during a quiet moment of rehearsal, some claimed to see a figure reflected in a mirror that wasn't there. A woman in the corner, always watching, always waiting. Then there were the more direct encounters. A young bartender once described reaching to pick up a fallen glass when she felt a hand grip her arm, not soft, not playful, but firm and unyielding. She spun around. The basement was empty. Another staffer swore that late one night, as he descended the stairs for a final check, he heard singing, soft, mournful, unmistakably female, coming from the well itself. The air grew icy, his breath clouding, and he fled, convinced he had seen a shadow stretch from the darkness toward him. Even patrons had stories. Some would feel watched while standing near the stairs, or hear faint footsteps echoing from the depths. Others reported seeing flashes of pale figures darting along the walls or standing silently in corners before vanishing the moment anyone looked directly at them. In time, the basement became a focal point of dread. What made the fear so persistent, so believable, was that it seemed to follow the rules of the building. The well, the walls, the corners, these weren't random sensations. Something lived here, something old, something patient, and while the music thrived upstairs, carrying laughter and applause, the basement held its secrets, feeding off the energy above, waiting for the moment someone would venture too far, stare too long, or listen too carefully to the whispers that drifted like smoke through the floorboards. Over the years, the whispers grew into voices, and the shadows took shape. Staff and patrons alike began to speak of distinct presences, of spirits that seemed tied to the history of the building, the land, and the well in the basement. There was Johanna. They said she was a dancer from decades past, her life cut short by tragedy. Some claimed she had been pregnant, her lover murdered by her own father, and that her spirit never left. Patrons would see a pale figure, always near the dance floor or peeking from a corner mirror, vanishing when anyone tried to approach. Some swore she lingered in the music itself, her sorrowful sighs threading through the steel guitars and boots on the floor. Then there was Pearl Bryan. Even though she had died years before the nightclub existed, her murder seemed to haunt the land itself. Witnesses spoke of fleeting glimpses of a young woman in period clothing, wandering silently across the floorboards, or standing by the bar, her eyes empty and accusing. Some claimed her presence was strongest near the well in the basement, where the rumors said her spirit might have been drawn after death. Not all encounters were quiet or subtle. A bartender named Janet Mackey reported one of the most chilling experiences. While alone in the club, she felt a force grab her, lift her from the floor, and throw her across the room. A voice, sharp and commanding, hissed at her, "Get out." She scrambled to the nearest exit, her heart hammering, and never forgot the cold emptiness that followed her gaze to the basement. Objects moved on their own. Glasses slid across bars. Chairs toppled. Lights flickered violently, often when no one was near. Some who dared to descend into the basement reported hearing footsteps pacing behind them, or whispers that seemed to speak directly to their thoughts, coaxing, warning, mocking. The sensations were so real that even the most skeptical left convinced that something unseen had made contact. The combination of tragedy, ritual, and fear created a perfect storm. Music, laughter, and life above ground clashed with the darkness below, a tension that built night after night. For those who entered the club, the feeling of being watched was inescapable. And for many, the memory lingered long after leaving, an invisible thread tying them to the basement, to the well, to the whispers of Johanna, Pearl, and the unknown. It wasn't just folklore or exaggeration. These were people with faces, names, lives interrupted, each encounter leaving a mark, on the witnesses, on the building, and on the legends that grew heavier with every passing year. Bobby Mackey's music world wasn't just haunted. It was alive, in a way that made every laugh, every stomp of boots, every note of a song, carry the weight of the past, the sorrow of the dead, and the persistent tug of a portal that refused to close. Upstairs, the club thrived. The neon lights pulsed in time with the music, the mechanical bull groaned under daring riders, and the bar rang with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Every night, Bobby Mackey's music world drew crowds from near and far, people eager for live country music, a night of dancing, and the sense of community that came from shared joy. But below, the basement never rested. The well, the shadows, the whispers, they were patient. And as the years went on, the activity escalated. Patrons reported the feigned strains of singing, soft and mournful, rising from the basement during the busiest hours. Some said the figures of Johanna or Pearl Bryan would appear at the edges of the dance floor, glimpsed just for a moment before vanishing into the crowd. Others spoke of feeling cold fingers brush against their arms, or of hearing their own name called from empty corners. It wasn't only subtle unease. Staff experienced violent, inexplicable events. Glasses flew across rooms, doors slammed with such force they shook the walls. Lights flickered, plunging parts of the club into sudden darkness, often accompanied by a whisper, a sigh, or the distinct sound of footsteps that matched no living person. On occasion, a patron would vanish briefly, only to reappear moments later, pale and shaken, unable to explain what had happened. The duality of Bobby Mackey's made the hauntings more surreal. Life thrived above, music pulsed through the crowd, and yet the building's past bled through, the basement, the well, the shadows, all feeding on the energy above. Some argued the spirits were drawn to joy, or perhaps angered by it, striking out when they felt the living had trespassed too far into their domain. As word spread, the club gained national attention. Ghost hunters, paranormal investigators, and curious tourists arrived, hoping to witness the unexplained. Equipment often registered inexplicable readings. Sudden drops in temperature, EMF spikes, and disembodied voices captured on tape. Yet for every skeptic who left unimpressed, there were dozens who swore they had felt something, an unseen presence brushing past them, a whisper in the dark, a fleeting shadow that no one could explain. The music above could not drown out the basement below. The life, laughter, and energy of the club were in constant tension with the darkness hidden beneath. And as the years went on, the stories compounded, layering truth with legend, until Bobby Mackey's music world became more than a nightclub. It became a living memory of horror, joy, and tragedy, an American landmark of both music and the supernatural, impossible to forget, impossible to leave behind once you have felt its shadows. As the years went on, the hauntings grew bolder. What had once been fleeting glimpses and whispers became undeniable confrontations. Staff members reported doors slamming in rapid succession, as if an invisible hand were marching down the hall. Glasses toppled from the bar without cause. Chairs slid across the floor as though pushed by unseen patrons. And always, there was the basement, the well, the pit of darkness waiting silently beneath the floorboards. One of the most chilling reports came from a young bartender who worked the late shift. Alone in the empty club, she went to collect a glass that had fallen behind the bar. Suddenly, a cold hand gripped her arm so firmly she could barely breathe. When she spun around, no one was there. A whisper hissed in her ear, "Leave." Shaking, she bolted for the door, only to glance back and see a pale, indistinct figure at the base of the basement stairs, vanishing when she blinked. Musicians, too, experienced encounters that defied explanation. Instruments tuned perfectly moments before would be wildly out of tune by the time a song began. Microphones would emit low, guttural noises even when turned off. Some performers swore they felt a presence standing behind them, watching their every move, only for the audience to see nothing. Visitors told of being pushed, scratched, or grabbed by unseen forces. One couple recounted feeling a cold breath on the back of their necks and then hearing a voice whisper their names in the dark. Another claimed to see a young woman in period clothing standing silently at the bar, her eyes hollow, before disappearing entirely. Every encounter left its mark, leaving the witness shaken, pale, and often silent for hours afterward. The basement itself seemed alive. The well, the supposed portal to hell, exuded a cold pressure that made even the bravest hesitate. Some who ventured too close reported a tug in their chest, a sensation that something below was aware of them, studying them. Others swore they saw shadows stretching along the walls, forming grotesque, elongated figures that didn't obey the laws of the room. The air often carried whispers, soft enough to be missed but insistent enough to linger in the mind long after leaving. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the stories had multiplied. Patrons, staff, and curious visitors told their tales to local newspapers, paranormal investigators, and eventually television crews. The legend of Bobby Mackey's music world grew. It became a place where joy and terror coexisted, where the music above clashed with the darkness below, and where every night offered the possibility of a glimpse, or a touch, of something beyond understanding. Even skeptics could not ignore the patterns. The incidents were consistent. The shadows, the whispers, the cold spots, the sense of being watched. Something was alive in that basement, something old, patient, and hungry for attention. And it had waited a long time for the world above to hear its story. As the stories of strange happenings multiplied, Bobby Mackey's music world caught the attention of the broader public. Paranormal enthusiasts, ghost hunters, and journalists descended on the small Kentucky town, drawn by the tales of shadows, whispers, and the infamous basement well. Television crews began arriving in the 1980s and 1990s. Shows like Unsolved Mysteries, Ghost Hunters, and Ghost Adventures brought cameras into the dimly lit club, capturing glimpses of what some insisted could not be explained by natural causes. Objects moved without reason, cold spots registered on equipment, disembodied voices echoed through microphones. Even the skeptics on these crews often admitted to an uneasy feeling, as if unseen eyes followed every movement. Ghost hunters spoke of layered presences. Johanna, the dancer who met a tragic end. Pearl Bryan, whose murder stained the land long before the club existed. And the residual energy of rituals performed in the basement, each added to the tapestry of unease. Instruments would malfunction, lights flicker, and patrons would feel cold fingers brush against them when no one else was nearby. The notoriety drew tourists as well. People came from across the country to dance above the basement, laugh with friends, and test their courage against the whispers below. Many left with nothing more than stories to tell. Some left shaken, pale, and convinced they had brushed against something beyond the veil. Others never spoke of what they experienced at all, as if recounting it would somehow make it real again. Local newspapers chronicled incidents, sudden disappearances of patrons, unexplained bruises or scratches, and the occasional physical altercation with a presence no one could see. Investigators documented unusual electromagnetic readings, temperature drops, and inexplicable sounds that echoed through the floors and walls. These reports were detailed, consistent, and often corroborated by multiple witnesses, adding weight to a legend that might otherwise have seemed fanciful. By the turn of the century, Bobby Mackey's had transcended its identity as a music venue. It was a cultural landmark of horror and mystery, a place where joy and dread coexisted. The club's reputation was cemented in the public imagination, a nightclub where the music never truly stopped, because the echoes of the past, the sorrow, the tragedy, and the anger, were still very much alive, lingering in the shadows of the basement, in the corners of the dance floor, and in the flicker of neon lights. Even today, the stories persist. New patrons arrive curious, daring, or skeptical, but all leave with an awareness that the building is more than wood, brick, and neon. It is memory, it is history, and it is a place where the living brush against the dead, whether they want to or not. After decades of music, laughter, and whispers from the basement, the original Bobby Mackey's Music World building came to the end of its life. In March 2024, the club closed its doors, leaving behind years of history, both vibrant and terrifying. Fans of the music, the legends, and the stories of the supernatural gathered to say their farewells, unaware that even the act of leaving would not sever the connection the building had to the land, or to those who had passed through it. Plans were made to relocate the nightclub to Florence, Kentucky, temporarily, while a new facility was constructed. Yet, despite the move, the essence of Bobby Mackey's did not vanish. The basement well, long rumored to be the portal to hell, was carefully preserved and transported to the new location, a tangible link to the hauntings that had defined the original venue. Staff and patrons noted that even in the new site, the air sometimes carried the same chill, the same whispers, the same subtle sense of being watched. On December 10, 2024, the original building was demolished. The walls that had contained decades of music and dread crumbled, but the stories did not. The echoes of laughter, the footsteps of spirits, the soft strains of a woman singing in the dark, they remained in memory, in photographs, in recordings, and in the hearts of those who had been there. The legacy of Bobby Mackey's Music World endures not merely as a haunted nightclub, but as a living record of history, tragedy, and folklore intertwined. The tales of Johanna, Pearl Bryan, the basement well, and the shadows that lurk at the edge of perception continue to draw attention, curiosity, and fear. For anyone who has stepped through its doors, whether in Wilder or Florence, the experience lingers. The building may have fallen, the walls may be gone, but the hauntings, the energy, and the stories persist. Even today, people speak of a place where music and malevolence coexist, where the past reaches out to the present, and where the dead are never truly gone. The new location, the temporary home, and the legend itself all serve as reminders that some stories are too potent to fade with time, that some shadows cannot be contained, and that the echoes of the past always find a way to be heard. Bobby Mackey's Music World is more than a nightclub. It is a living memory, a haunting, and a warning. Some doors, once opened, never truly close.
Thank you for hanging around until the end of our tale. Every view is appreciated. If you have enjoyed it, please hit that like button and considering commenting and subscribing.